Phil here, Phil Braybrook. Really pleased this evening to be able to have Richard and Emily join us for our inaugural off-bike training session. And, today's session will be successful based on your questions and your input. We've already got some questions. The focus is going to be around training and specifically training around these challenging times in terms of not always knowing where the focus is going to be in terms of race. Just hold on a minute, there's a few more people want to get in. Let me admit them. So, all these latecomers in. I think everybody's in now. Right. So yeah. So the focus is going to be around, how to structure your training in these challenging and difficult times, which will be different for each of us. So that's the subject area. So Alex, do you want to kick off and introduce Rich for us? Alex, you're going to introduce Richard. Alex, you're going to introduce Rich.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute, and it was on the wrong screen. So yeah, thankfully we're lucky tonight to have Richard Lang with us to give some insights into racing as a junior and under 23. So Rich is Australian British. He spent kind of his younger years as a junior and under 23, as far as I'm aware, in the research I've done into him and from racing a little bit, I think at Track League maybe many years ago. Yeah. Racing with the Australian Institute of Sport in Australia, both on the track and the road. And then through his under 23 career, moved to race out in Italy. And then following on from quite a successful career in Italy to racing in Britain as a professional, first with JLT and then with Rally and then back with JLT again in his later years of his career. So yeah, over to Rich who wants to do just a quick kind of additional introduction to that and maybe what he's kind of doing now, still involved a lot with the sport.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Alex. I guess, you covered most of it. I started riding at 16. I started on the track, and started at the quite regional level. I'm quite fortunate that my father, he was a rider, a good masters rider. So I learned of a lot of the craft through him. And yeah, I was able to fortunately progress on the track. I couldn't climb for pants till I was about 21 or so. And I was able to, I did under 16s and then over in Australia, we got under 19s and there was a big pressure to do junior worlds. I did quite well at Youth Olympics with 3 silvers. And then 2 weeks later was track nationals. And then I just burnt myself out and I pulled out of nationals, which was quite a disappointing experience. And then transitioned to the road. So the first 2 years of under 23, really struggled, started to hit my stride in the back end of that and forced my way onto the AIS team. And that's where I lived in Italy for 2 years, sort of on and off, 3 months on, 3 months back, 3 months there. First year, got an absolute kick in. And I actually sort of fell in quite a negative cycle in terms of getting dropped in racing, not thinking I'm fueling enough. So I'd eat too much and then sort of started having a sort of, not a weight issue, but poor relationship with food. Second year, hit my stride, went quite well, had a big injury mid-season after winning quite a big Italian race. And that took 3 months out of the season where I was training back up for Tour 11-year, Giro Val d'Aosta and Worlds. But unfortunately, in Worlds, had 2 tooth infections and crashed out, which was a bit of a damper again. But quite an awesome experience, sort of being exposed to Italian racing, for those who, thinking of racing abroad. And that's what brought me over to the UK. So, just with the cycling world, it's quite a small world. Always got to, keep friendly, don't burn no bridges. Sort of made the connection with John Harity, and that's what brought me over to the UK. So my mother, she's British. I've got a British passport. And yeah, rode when I was Rafa Condor Sharp, then Team Rally back into JLT. And then these days I'm still in the cycling. I have a business called Spoked, and spoke is essentially it's a cycling coach that's powered by algorithms. So if you notice today, Trainer Roads announced their adaptive training. They finally caught up to us. What we're focusing on is making it simple to train smarter. So through my experience, through Chris Newton's experience, through Nick Berger, who's the sports scientist, what we do is provide as much value of what a coach would do, but for a fraction of the price. And so that's a big passion of mine. Is it's just about spreading the word about helping people, train smarter. And it's not necessarily, win the Tour de France, but it's just trying to, build positive habits within your cycling. Yeah, that's me.
Okay, thanks, Rich. And just to introduce Emily. Emily started a cycling career at Lichfield City Cycling Club, but it wasn't long before she'd been spotted by British Cycling and their talent programs. And she, amongst her many achievements, the ones that are of significant note are she's a 2 times world track champion and a 2 times European track champion across multiple disciplines on the track. So pursuit, scratch, and Madison. So fantastic career on the track, but showing her versatility as well. Also won the Circle Classic, the Women's Circle Classic, as well as winning at, I think it was Norwich, Emily, for the Matrix Fitness GP there, and also coming second at Lincoln. I'm sure Richard's raced at Lincoln, and anyone who has will know that going up Micklegate a few times is going to do damage to anyone's legs. So fantastic career both on the track and on the road. So welcome, Emily.
Hello, thanks for having me.
That's okay. Do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my cycling career started sort of by accident. So I was a swimmer, and I actually joined Lichfield City Cycling Club because I wanted to go into triathlon, and I'd done a lot of running, I'd done a lot of swimming, so the cycling was the only thing I hadn't done. And it sort of went from there. I decided that I didn't want to do triathlon. I wanted to do cycling on its own. It was the most fun out of the 3 sports. So that's how I got into cycling. And sort of throughout my career, I've been on British cycling pretty much the whole time, from about 14 years old to when I was about 23. So 9 years I spent going through the program. So I have quite a bit of experience in that sort of sense. And as you said, I've done road and track, and in my youth I did cyclocross and mountain biking as well. So I've done all the disciplines, but my favorite was definitely track. So that's a bit more about me.
Thanks very much, Emily. So do you want to start then? There's a couple of questions, I think a few questions which have been put forward, Alex, which you were going to put to Rich.
Yeah, so I think we'll kind of, with Rich, try and start off with his time moving from Italy. So I know we've got a lot of juniors on this call at the minute who may be looking to go into under 23s and starting to maybe race internationally, and also we'll have some under 23s maybe looking to race internationally. And it's quite a good point actually to talk about that, because I know there's a lot at the minute to do with Brexit, and now the UK being outside of obviously of the European Union, moving to the EU, that moving to be it France, Belgium or Italy, and the visas and everything that's involved with that makes it a little bit more similar, I guess, from coming all the way across from Australia to race in Europe. So kind of if you can think back to maybe your first couple of years, or your first year, or first arriving in Italy as it was back in, it would have been 2009, I think, am I right in saying, or 2010, Rich?
Yeah, I think it was 10.
Yeah, 2010. How was kind of that like? Kind of talk us through it, coming over with the Australian Institute of Sport and finding yourself in a house, presumably with a load of other cyclists.
Yeah. It's definitely quite a culture shock, but I think being part of the AIS, we're probably sheltered in a way. We're in a house with 4 others. Everyone's speaking English, we're not speaking Italian. So the group that I came over with Rowan Dennis, Michael Matthews, Luke Durbridge, Michael Hepburn, Jay McCarthy, you know, all those lads there, you know, their names, and, you know, we're riding with them. But my experience in the first year got an absolute kicking. You know, I'd get to like Turigan or something like that, and I've been thinking, when's your groove paddo going to form? And that's like, okay, yeah, that's the point I've got to make. But as you know, you're making this progression from under 19s, under 23 elite. You know, I'm sure as you've experienced even within your training, is that you can't force strength. You know, you just can't be stronger than what you are. You can't rush that process. And so if you are thinking of going abroad, it's going into the mindset of, I'm going to really enjoy it. Don't have this pressure on you thinking, I've got to perform, I've got to turn pro. Because I think if you have that mindset of like every race, you know, you've got to perform, it's not going to work. That's sort of something that was in my downfall and something that I reflect in my career. But if I looked at, say, Michael Matthews, before Tour of Japan that we're going to travel out, he had a back injury, but he was the most chillaxed fella ever. You know, just didn't really care, did what he needed to do, and then he arrived on the start line and he just enjoyed the process. So for me, like between the 2 years, like first year being in Italy, second year being in Italy, you know, the first year and in cycling, you're going to get a spanking, you know, but that's sort of the rite of passage. You know, there's only those freaks who can, you know, when they dip in first year, they go really well. But I think the mindset you need to go into is like, I'm going to really enjoy my cycling. I'm going to embrace it. You're going to focus on process, you know. So if you're going in Belgium or Italy, like Italy's all about climbing, then you've got to think about position, descending. You know, Alex, you can sort of speak about, you know, even racing in France.
Yeah.
It's a big learning experience. And I think it's more, okay, I'll go in across there first year, I'll absorb everything, and then, you know, I'll have another stint next year. And you'll just notice yourself, handle yourself a lot better in the bunch, be, you know, a lot more calmer around races. And I think if you're calm and you're just enjoying it, you know, the cycling and the outcomes will come.
Yeah, and then so I guess really moving on for that, because it's interesting that you talk about like the process there, actually, Rich, because actually really that process actually really worked for you in Italy. So then would it be your second year in Italy, you went into it and you won like Trofeo Piva, which if I don't know if how many riders on this call follow kind of under 23 racing on the continent, but you know, if you look at the Palmares of a race like Trofeo Piva, it's a pretty big thing to win a race like Piva, and I know I've raced it myself, and it's pretty savage. So I guess kind of then within that process, going from 2010, getting a kick in right at the start of your career as an under 23 to then 2011, where you were winning, what kind of within that process really started to click? Was it like your time out in Italy, just adapting to the racing, like you say, moving around in the bunch, or what? It just development.
Yeah, you become more familiar. Like that race that I did in 2010, I got dropped in that race and didn't even finish it. Pulled the pin on it because I think the race was, if I remember correctly, you do big loops and then eventually comes down to the finish.
Yeah, you got that climb. Yeah. I know which
one. And I can remember distinctly in 2011, going up that last steep climb on the small circuits. Yeah. Positioned myself quite well, like 5th, 6th position, and I'm thinking, damn, I'm up here. You know, everyone's dropped, and I'm not like redlining and get over the top, and there's only 10 of us. I'm like, I'm on one here. But the main thing was just being familiar. You know how the bunch operates. You know, it's carnage. You know, you've got to go full gas down the hills. But you just sort of adapt to it. You know, your level rises. But and it comes down to that cycling. Cycling's a long game. You know, it's only the freaks that can, you know, excel in their first year. So in that first year where I got a kick in, you know, if I reflect now, I should really enjoy that process of saying, yep, this is where I'm getting my strength. You know, you're putting yourself out there, you're exposing yourself, you know, to these elements. And then within the second year, it's like, okay, I know what I'm doing here. And, you know, it's like Alex, like you say, just focus on the process. You know, it's like, okay, these are the big circuits where I need to be on certain points, make sure I stay on top of my nutrition. What's the team doing? You know, what's the race situation? Yeah, you just sort of, you know, think one lap at a time.
So Emily, from your perspective, what was your kind of big learning as you transitioned from a junior to the senior ranks as an athlete?
Yeah, I think for women it's definitely a lot different to men because we don't have the under 23 category. So I remember even in the UK we didn't have a junior category. So I went straight from under 16 to racing with elite women in the UK. And then I did some racing over in Belgium, and that was straight from junior to elite. So to be honest, it's a lot like Rich said, you can't just go into these races thinking you're going to win or you're going to come top 10 or anything like this if you're a first year. I remember my first year out in Belgium, it was 2016, and it was a first year under 23. And like the whole team, we just got dropped in pretty much all the races. And we were there as like Great Britain cycling team, and we were the track team, but like we had good power, we were strong, we'd do well in British races. And we went over to Belgium and we were just getting dropped in all the races. And I think that, like Rich said, it is like a massive learning curve. It's like it wasn't just because we weren't strong enough, it was because we'd never been in that situation before. We hadn't raced in that sort of environment. It's very different to British racing. Like even just things like cold sections, like some of the narrow roads, even just like having closed roads. Like in the UK, a lot of the road races, they're open road, aren't they? So it's such a different sort of racing experience. And I think especially for all the younger riders like on the call here, it's like don't get disheartened, because it takes like as a female, because there isn't that under 23 category, it takes 3 or 4 years of racing abroad before you think, yeah, like I'm starting to like feel good now, this is like where I want to be. But like you will, I remember I was watching my sister race a cyclocross World Cup, and it was I was just watching it on GCN, so it was like commentator, and it was the American cyclocross. It's really rude, I can't remember his name.
Hours?
And he was saying that as a young rider in a field like that, so my sister was first year under 23 racing with elite, and he was saying that about all these under 23s, they might have one good race and they'll get one good result, and that'll show that they have the potential, but then all their other results could be like really not really anything special or anything like that, but that one good result shows that they're good enough and shows that they have the potential, and that'll be the sort of thing that big teams pick up on. And like that's exactly what sort of happened to some of the girls that I was racing with. They'd have like one good result and you wouldn't really see them the rest of the season, and then they'd have another one good result. And I think you have to remember that you can't consistently go and race every weekend or every couple of weeks and have that like really strong results. So yeah, a couple of things there, I guess.
Thanks, Emily. So Rich, going back to what was the focus here in terms of top tips. So we're in these uncertain times at the moment without having a race calendar in front of us and clear objectives. So from a training perspective, how would you what would be your advice to deal with that?
I think, I'm sure everyone on this call here is, driven, like if someone put on the program, you've got to do 5 hours, you do 5 hours or 4 hours, or whatever. So for me, a training program is all about trying to create structure. And, there is, should be racing happening in the back end of the year, maybe wait till July, August time, but it's still a fair chunk of time away. So what I would ask you is, what races are you going to target? And in those races, what are the key demands that will determine success? So if just say national crit title, and it's quite a hilly circuit, it's got say a minute burst every lap, well then I'd start replicating that type of training, that type of demand. So, repeating, 1 minute VO2 multiple times. I'll start replicating that within your training, and that would become your focus point. And, you'd establish an objective benchmark. So it doesn't have to be a power number. You can, use Strava segments and just sort of see where you're at and create like a little mini competition for yourself within your training program. But I think what also important, especially with the uncertain times, is not to put this pressure on yourself. I think it's okay to let things slide. So you may just knock off 20% off what you'd normally do. So just say you normally do, 10, 12 hours a week, only do 8. And so, you still keeping the consistency there. You know, you're not going to be losing form in 8 hours. You're still going to be making some progression. But I think from a mental perspective, you're going to be in a lot better place, you know, when it comes to, you know, squeezing on the gas. So, you know, you may just do 20% less up until back in March, early April. Then the certainty comes around the event. Well, then your training steps up. You know, you got a bit more fire in the belly, and, you know, you'll be a lot more efficient and effective in your training program.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Rich. So actually, also it's just worth to say, if anyone has any questions at this point, as we're just kind of going through and doing this kind of informal interview Q&A, just unmute your mics and butt in. That's absolutely fine. But also then, Rich, how would you kind of then relate that back to, you mentioned your time in Italy when you were injured. I think near the end of your first year there. How did you kind of deal with that, and how has that been? Did you stay out in Italy then, presumably?
I struggled a lot. So I did stay out in Italy for probably about 6 weeks, where I couldn't ride at all. It was quite interesting run. So I crashed in a big Italian race where 50 guys come down in a bunch kick, and I smacked my patella against the handlebars, so I bruised the bone there. So I could walk fine, I could do gym fine, but that pedaling action just couldn't do anything. So we tried to race, but yeah, I just couldn't keep up with the pace. So after 6 weeks, I moved back to Australia, and that's probably the best thing that happened to me. You know, just getting back into your support network. I think as a Brit, you're sort of quite fortunate that, you know, Belgium's only an hour flight away, or France is, you know, an hour flight. Like for me, it's 24 hours flying, you know, almost, you know, a day and a half travel. And then it's just getting back to fundamentals. You know, I think, you know, when you have an injury or when you get sick, it's, you know, you don't want to waste the time. So, you know, in cycling, it's a holistic sport. You know, yes, you've got the training element, but, you know, you can work on your nutrition, you can work on your mobility, you can work on your core. And so, you know, I liked having a goal, liked having structure, like pushing myself. So then I just sort of threw myself in those other domains. So worked on my mobility, my flexibility. And then, you know, just slowly but surely, you know, the knee improved. And, you know, it's quite surprising how quickly you can get into form. You know, if you're a rider who's been consistent and you have, you know, I'd say 2 months of inconsistent training, you'll be quite surprised how quickly you can get back up there. So, you know, it's like this, every cloud has a silver lining. So if you are injured and sick, you know, focus on other elements of the sport. And I think that's what kept me sane through that time, plus having the family support.
How was that? I suppose actually that 6 weeks then in Italy is probably maybe the closest you've come to isolation, other than coronavirus maybe. How was that like that 6 weeks with no bike? Your other teammates were racing. You're probably in the house with them. They were coming back from training. How was that time, that really short 6 week period?
It was brutal because I won that race, and all the lads, they were like top 3, winning a couple. I'm thinking, I was beating you in training, you know, that should have been me. And that was a really hard pill to swallow. But, you know, it makes you stronger, you know, it builds a fire in your belly. And you know, like Emily, you know, and I, you know, I don't think, you know, as everyone else experiences here, cycling is a hard sport. You know, you've got to be tough. And it's these experiences that shape you. And so I think being injured, not being able to train, sort of seeing the others go well, probably just helped me sort of race in the UK. It just makes you more adaptable and just allows you to sort of roll with the punches and go with the flow.
Yeah.
So Emily, perhaps a question for you then, because you obviously had to balance the demands of the track in GB, and I'm sure also wanting to race on the road. How did you manage that with your training, with having those kind of two different aspects of the sport that you were trying to compete in?
I think that the thing with track is, even though you are only racing for such a short period of time, you do quite a lot of endurance as well. So we were sort of, during the winter, we were keeping the endurance ticking along. So maybe like 2 long rides a week, and the rest would be short, intense sessions or track sessions, gym sessions. And then come sort of the spring, summer, when track worlds was finished, our coaches would give us the option, like, do you want to race on the road? And if we did, our program would be adapted more to that, so we'd have some more longer rides, the chance to race at weekends. But I think one of the best things you can do to train for racing is to race. So I mean, I know it's very hard at the moment, but I always think that the first like race, the road race especially, that you do, it's never going to be the one that you're like full gas into. Never sort of aim to peak for that if I was, if it were me, because you want to get back into the flow of like the pain of racing as well. It's very different to training. I always find anyway, you can never push yourself that like 110% that you can in a race in a training session, unless there's some sort of stimulus in the training session, you're racing with friends or something like that. But I think with balancing two different disciplines, it's very important to not try and spread yourself too thin. So you want to have a couple of races that you're aiming for and sort of go big for those, and train through the other ones, because as you spend the whole year racing and you don't spend any time training, and your form will just dip. So I used to use sort of a lot of road races as training for like nationals, or like a big race in Belgium that I was aiming for. And all the other races, I'll go there and I wanted to do well, but I wasn't putting the pressure on myself to do well. I was putting I was thinking more about positioning and sort of trying to be there at the end, but knowing that maybe I've not got that 100% best form. So you definitely can't aim for every single race that you do if you're doing two different disciplines, especially when they're not at the same point in the year, because you'll just burn out.
Thanks.
So
basically.
I guess following on from that, maybe I think to Rich then. So if we're thinking now to his time after he spent time in Italy, came to race in the UK when he was with JLT, Rally, then back with JLT. Am I right in thinking at some point during those 3 years, Rich, you worked alongside racing professionally as well?
Yeah, I found it difficult, to be honest. So I guess going back to Emily's point also with the two focuses, something that I'd like to highlight is that, even though you're not trying to win the race, you're trying to focus more on the opportunity. So like Emily said, try to get to the back end of the race. So you can trying to put yourself into a sprint. You're not going to win the sprint, but it's going through the process of, the last lap, where do you need to be at 200. And then if you deliver, you deliver. But if you don't, you can sort of say, yeah, that's okay. I gave myself every opportunity. But yeah, I like how Emily sort of approached that. But sorry, going back to work-life balance. So the way it happened with me is I did full-time Rafa Condor Sharp, full-time team rally. So at the age of 24, I said, okay, I've got to get a job here, got to start making a living. I was still riding my bike, and then I went back to JLT Condor, and my focus was Tour Series. And I found it quite a struggle, especially being, sort of being that sort of semi-professional. Your focus is fully on the bike, then to juggling. So the way I'd probably approach it if I'm sort of to go back in time is probably be a lot more sort of structured with my training. I probably didn't have all the tools at my disposal like we do have these days, with like a smart power trainer, and you got Swift, and you can just sort of build your form probably a lot easier. So I went back to Tour Series, and I just had to really focus on what is my job within the team. So I didn't have to be there at the end of 200K races. I just had to be there for the Tour Series. And so that's an hour-long race. It's top end VO2. You need good threshold. So that's how I structured my training.
Okay, great. So I think now, I could probably talk and ask questions all evening, but it's probably a good chance to ask if anyone kind of what we've talked about so far, if any of riders, anyone else on the call has any questions. So feel free to unmute your mics, or if you don't want to do that, you can always post in the chat, and we can get them from there. So anyone with anything?
Hi, I just have a question about kind of training and racing balance, which I think Emily kind of answered for me. But in the UK, we obviously kind of race most weekends road racing, and we might have like a midweek crit or a midweek time trial, and it maybe an old-fashioned approach was like racing yourself fit and that kind of thing, and now a more scientific approach is kind of actually using the training. So I just want to know both Rich and Emily's thoughts on the benefits of both racing and training, and maybe which one actually is the best for racing results.
Thank you.
You want to go, Emily?
Oh, okay. Just like my initial thought to that is, if you are racing, say, both days on the weekend and once during the week, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Like I did that quite a lot, but you have to remember that that's 3 really intense sessions in your 7 days of the week. So if you train, say, 5 days a week, usually have 2 days rest, then you've got 2 of the training days, and they would need to be like quite low intensity potentially, because else you are just going to burn yourself out, like I said. And potentially, I mean, getting not doing all 3, maybe do 2 of them. Like there's nothing wrong with racing a couple times a week. Like I did tour series as well, and we could do like 3 a week for, say, a month, but by the end of the month you were absolutely knackered, even if you weren't training intense in between. So well, I was absolutely knackered. So I don't know about how everyone else works, but I think it is individual. If it works for you, then I can sure go for it. But I personally, I think Rich probably has a better answer than me. But yeah, I wouldn't race too often, but you have to remember that your racing is a very intense training session. So you have to counteract that with sort of the other sessions need to be low intensity or rest. So that'd be my advice.
Yeah, I definitely found as a junior, because obviously you can do road races then with the elites as well. I was probably racing a bit too much both days on the weekend, try to do road races, and but I'm under 23 now, but obviously I've not been able to race probably for a couple of years. Well, last year, and I kind of think that maybe just that 2 races a week, on a midweek, even if it's just like you say a 40-minute crit to kind of use as a session, and 1 race on the weekend, a longer race, was kind of where I found the middle ground.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if it's only a 40-minute crit, that would be how long you do a training session for, wouldn't it? After you've done, like, say, a 20-minute warm up, your 40-minute crit, your 10-minute warm down, that's like only an hour 10 sessions. So I don't think that's like over pushing yourself. And then 1 race at the weekend, maybe if that's a Sunday, on the Monday you go out, do a long low intensity ride, and then sort of plan your training around that. Maybe have your rest day Friday, activation Saturday, race Sunday, long ride Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday crit, what sort of thing. That would be my advice. But I'm sure maybe Rich, from a sort of coaching point of view, has got something to add to that.
No, I agree with everything you said there, Emily. I think George is like, you've got to almost approach it in batches. It's like 3 races a week. That's a lot of racing, and like tour series only goes over for like 3 to 4 weeks. Because if you're racing 3 times a week, you're not training. It's like train, rest. Otherwise, you're not getting the right stimulus, from the racing. You'll go into the race too tired, and then you're not, maybe you might get dropped halfway, and then you're not getting that right, the benefit for the racing. So, I guess what is your goal for 2021, George?
So originally, pre-COVID, I finished my A-levels, and my plan was to go to France, potentially, was what I was looking at. As a junior, I did race a little bit abroad, and obviously I enjoyed that. But after COVID, I've started uni now, because just being uncertain with what was going to happen. So basically, I want to, obviously this season, I want to, just get back into racing, and I'm probably going to just try and do as well domestically as I can while at university. And then obviously when 21, 22, I can maybe just see what that's brought from there. But
no, that makes sense. I think, this year and last year is quite unusual in terms of the seasons. And, you obviously, you got a hunger for racing. So I think when the racing does kick off and it does fit around the studies, I think my first instinct would be, yeah, just do the racing, just go and enjoy it, because, you know, you've been missing that and lacking that, and just getting the feel for how hard in the bunch again, you know, corner hard, descend, you know, go for the, you know, the sprints. But when it comes to, you know, going abroad, you know, you've got to start working on your depth, you know, the endurance work. And I think if you were to race 3 times a week and then layer on the endurance, just probably overload yourself too much. So when you're thinking about, oh, I'm going to start stepping up my volume, I think that's the time where you may do that 40-minute crit on the Wednesday and just one potential road race on the weekend, if that. You know, it'd probably be wise, you know, for a period of time where, you know, do say, you know, 3.5 hours, you know, with strength, you know, on Saturday, and then, you know, sticking some VO2 work on the Sunday within a 4-hour ride, but it's not as intense as the racing. And that way you're able to build your training, and then, you know, you go back into racing.
Oh, thank you to both of you. Thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions from folks? There must be some more questions out there. Unmute your mics and talk away. No? Okay. So perhaps then a question for Emily. If you were to look backwards, what would the advice to your younger self be?
Oh, I think I know we've already spoken about it, but definitely do not put so much pressure on myself, because even as a junior, like especially being in like the British cycling environment, there was just so much pressure to perform, and I think sometimes that does take the enjoyment out of it. And like looking back, as like a first year under 23, first year elite, going out and doing, like I did race out in Belgium, I just didn't enjoy it at all. And I was like, I don't like road racing. This is not for me. Like, I'm going to focus on the track. And then the following year, it was like mandatory. We had to go out again to Belgium and race. And I just put absolutely no pressure on myself at all. I was like, I don't really want to be here. I'm just going to race to train. Like, I'm going to survive as long as I can. I'm doing it because it'll make me stronger and it'll make me better on the track. And I actually finished all the races, and I got, I think, 4 top 10s in UCI events, as a second year under 23 in an elite event. So I actually performed much better in my second year, not really wanting to be there because I'd performed so badly the year before. And I think that really was like subconsciously, because I'd taken all that pressure off myself. I didn't feel the need to perform. I didn't feel the need to get results. And I wanted to race because I wanted to use it as training. I sort of went in with a completely different mindset to potentially what a lot of, well, probably what everybody else in the field was there for. So yeah, I think sort of remove that pressure from yourself. Make sure that you're still enjoying like the other aspects of your life as well. Like George mentioned, that is at university, and sort of trying to balance those two things can actually have a lot of benefits for the cycling, because if all you're doing is concentrating on cycling all the time and it's all you're thinking of, you sort of get mental fatigue. Like at my first year on academy, I was living in a house with 2 other girls, and all we did was ride bikes. Like it was back in 2015, and British cycling were very strict. Like you weren't allowed to, if they caught you going out shopping, anything like this, they'd pull you in for a meeting. Like, you know, you should be resting, you shouldn't be on your feet. And it's changed completely now, and that's much for the better. But it just meant that all the time all we were thinking about was cycling, and that was very detrimental. So I think it is very important to sort of enjoy yourself, enjoy like having a weekend off every 3-4 weeks, however it fits into your training, and go and meet your friends, go and do something that you enjoy doing other than riding a bike, because I absolutely loved riding a bike and I still do now. I really enjoy it, but you need to do something else that you enjoy as well. So yeah, 2 points. Don't like put too much pressure on yourself, because you'll just psych yourself out of a good performance, I think. And also, if it doesn't go well, then you're going to be in like a negative spiral. So sort of look at different positives. If it doesn't go well, what did you do well? What went well in that race that you can call a little victory? And like my second point is, don't be 100% cycling. Don't be like very narrow-minded about it. You need to have other things that you enjoy doing, like even if it's just like walking your dog every day, or going and seeing a friend, having coffee, you know, that sort of thing. I think those would be my 2 bits of advice to myself. So
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks. I maybe have one question for Rich, actually, again based on his time out in Italy, and then kind of reflecting on that and going over from Australia. So, did you ever meet anyone, or if you were to go back and maybe be put into a different position where you went abroad, and didn't have the structure of Australian cycling around you? So I'm sure you know, say for example, you went to go and ride out in Zalf in Italy, or Colpack, or an Italian team, or a French or Belgium. And this might be quite useful for George, you know, who's saying going, maybe looking to go abroad as an under 23. How would you now, looking back on it, best prepare yourself for going abroad without that structure around you?
I think you'd want to make sure you invest in a good coach, or, you know, you have a good support network out there, because you're going to go through the ups and downs. And living abroad, you know, you've got to focus more on just riding your bike. If I didn't have that AIS structure, you know, you've got to do, you know, shopping in a foreign country, you've got to get yourself to races. So I think it's really important to build a really good support network around you. You know, you listen to all the sort of the top pros, and, you know, they get there because they've got a fantastic team. So I think you can start replicating those type of environments. So I think it's support network, and then set yourself up in, you know, a positive environment. So, you know, whether it's, you know, making yourself, you know, how you need to clean your bike, how you look after your bike, you know, where you're living, you know, your training routes, you know, even sort of nutrition. I think it's it. But I think number one, support network. Like, and then that's sort of like something that I really noticed the difference when I was living in Australia, sort of living sort of back home with mum and dad, and, you know, the local roads, local bunches, or racing, and then going abroad. It's just completely different. So it's the support network for me.
Good, very good point. And then I guess you just mentioned then about when you were racing back in Australia, so as a junior. I know on this call we've maybe a couple of late last year under 16s, first year juniors who won't have raced. And Emily, if you could contribute to this would be really good as well. Just a bit about racing as a junior, mainly domestically. So how kind of maybe a little bit on that progression from under 16, where in the UK you're mainly racing crit races. So then as a junior, kind of the balance you want to look for there, maybe also racing on the track, and how you kind of found that. I know for Rich that's, you know, 12, 13 years ago now, but I'm sure it's still pretty rife in your mind.
Yeah, I think it's the same type of thing. It's like, you know, you are stepping up.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're going that year old, or especially in the new category, it's the same thing like going abroad. You know, it's, you know, a new set of riders, you know, the races are longer, they're more intense. And like Emily mentioned, it's about just focusing on that process, you know, rinse and repeat, and just enjoying it. And I think what's really important is just sometimes just take a moment and just sort of just think, you know, what you've achieved, and just sort of embrace what you're doing. Because, you know, you're 17, 18, 19 now. Trust me, when you're like 29, 30, maybe not in the professional world, you know, you really look back and at your time as a cyclist, no matter what level you've achieved, you know, that's stuck with you for life now, and something that you can share and connect with so many people. So I think it's going to be, you know, really important, you know, be proud of what you've achieved so far. You know, don't beat yourself up. I know I'm going a little bit off tangent here, but I always got caught in a mindset where no matter what happened, I was always looking at the next step. So whether it was at regionals, I'm thinking, no, I want to win states, and then the states, and, you know, you want to win nationals, and then nationals. Like, you're always looking ahead, but not celebrating what you've achieved. And I think there's no harm in sort of celebrating, you know, what you've done. And I think that may help tie into sort of the enjoyment, and just sort of like,
yeah, I agree. I think maybe Emily, you might be able to share on this from maybe British cycling perspective as well, because I know I've spoken to other riders, something that they've mentioned, like as a sport, cycling doesn't actually celebrate stuff that we do that well, like riders maybe win a World Cup or even some races, you win a local crit race and you don't want to go out and celebrate. You want to be in bed by 10 o'clock because you want to train the next day. Whereas if you contrast that to like football, after every match they win, they probably have a couple of pints, or maybe not anymore, but at least they celebrate, But in cycling, sometimes it doesn't seem to be quite the same. I don't know if you have any kind of memories of that, Emily, at all, or Rich.
Yeah, definitely. As I think you've hit the nail on the head there, really. Like as cyclists, we don't celebrate those small victories. I remember doing a World Cup, and it was maybe 2017, and we won it. So we won like gold medal in the team pursuit. Now I remember coming off, and we were all like really upset because we hadn't gone fast enough. Like our target time was whatever, and we'd been like half a second slower, which it isn't much at all, and we were all like really upset about it. And I remember saying to someone, but yeah, I mean, like it was a gold medal, but we didn't do what we wanted to do. And someone being like, hang on a sec, you won a gold medal at a World Cup and you're not happy with that? And I think it's sort of, for me, that was like a turning point where I was like, oh, actually, like we are good and we've won the race. Like why did we need to sort of, like we did what we went out to do. So I think, yeah, celebrating like small victories is like a massive thing. I was talking to a friend the other day about injuries as cyclists, and I think as cyclists we play everything down. Like if you crash your bike and you break your collarbone, you get back on the bike after 5 days and you're just there in a sling, like in loads of pain, but you're like, my legs can move, so I'm going to train. And I think sometimes we have to remember that we're just normal people, and if a footballer trips over sort of and hurts their ankle, they have 2 or 3 weeks out. They take matches off, don't they? And we get back on the bike straight away and profess everything's fine. And I've gone on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think it's quite important when you do get injured to sort of acknowledge it. And like Rich said, you don't lose form in 2-3 days. You don't lose form in like a month. Like you can get back on after having like 4-6 weeks off, and within 2 weeks you're pretty much back to where you were, as long as you've got like a consistent foundation. So
I think with that, a lot of the time it comes down to perspective, because like with the World Cup, like you were saying, actually, if you'd have told 12-year-old Emily that, oh, you're going to win a gold medal in a World Cup, you probably would have jumped for joy. But then suddenly you've gone from the 12-year-old self to the 2019, however old you were when you won the World Cup. And actually, you've gone from being a young athlete to a World Cup medal winning athlete, but you haven't really actually then gone and celebrated what maybe your dream was.
Yeah, 100%. You get caught up in it, don't you? And you don't sit back and reflect on sort of what you have actually achieved. And you just, like Rich said, you're just always looking at the next goal and looking at how you can improve to be better for next time. And that's great. It is great to reflect on how to improve and how to make yourself faster or higher power, but you've got to celebrate those victories at the same time, else that's what we're here for, to win bike races. And if you don't celebrate it, then yeah,
that was really good. Cheers. So we've actually just one question in the chat saying from Sam, how did you find and get to race abroad? So I might be able to answer that myself a little bit. And I think we are going to run a seminar soonish on actually getting abroad, whether that be as a junior, under 23, how to find races, whether that be in Belgium or France. And I don't know if Emily or Rich have any kind of thoughts on that, whether that's finding a team in the UK that you will then take you abroad. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, maybe I'm not the best to contribute there. I got probably quite fortunate in my career in racing abroad. I was very sort of supported in that way through AIS and then through John Harity and Sherry. But But I guess it comes down to, like Alex, I'm sure you'll cover within the workshop. I think networking is really important. You know, obviously, you know, cycling's a small world. You know, you want to get on the race team. So I think it's never too early, you know, just to drop an email to that DS, make a connection, just sort of say hello and just sort of get them on that radar. At the end of the day, you know, the legs need to do the talking. But I think it's a good skill to have, you know, just know how to type an email properly, you know, follow up, introduce yourself, create a CV. You know, I created so many CVs, you know, trying to detail your results, who you are, why you're a good fit for the team. And then, you know, when you do have a result, you know, within the UK, you know, whether it's a Nat B, you know, a lead or so, you drop them a note. And I think if you do that over, say, a 12 to 18 month period where you maybe want to race abroad in 2 years' time, I think you'll be in a much better position to secure a place if the results are there, as opposed to just popping out of nowhere thinking, hey, this is me.
Yeah, that's really good.
Over the next couple of weeks, we've got a couple of DSs, one from a kind of more male, one from a more female experience in Mark and Rene, who I'm sure will give an interesting perspective on that one, Rich. And we are going to run a seminar as well on building your cycling palmares and how, you know, what you might want to think about including in that and what might work and how you might use it. So they're definitely subject areas which we've got coming along in the curriculum of events.
And I guess that ties into, there's another question in here about the social media.
Yeah.
When I was racing, there wasn't really a consideration. I'm bloody showing my age here, but we didn't really have that. But maybe these days it might be different. What's that Cornwall team? Yeah, so yeah, I think they're quite heavily invested in riders having a social presence. But my first thoughts on that would be focus on becoming a cyclist first. Let the legs do the talking, and then, you know, you can start building up the social media following.
What about your perspective on that, Emily? Because obviously it must have been quite a kind of controlled environment almost within GB, and how you built or didn't build your social media presence.
It was sort of strongly advised to have social media, but it wasn't something that it was like, yes, you need to do this, you need to have this. But we did have a lot of kind of education around social media, but it was more, I sometimes felt like the social media, that it was more of don't say this, like how to try and come across well. So, you know, don't put things on your social media that you wouldn't want your future employee or your future manager to read. So, I mean, that's quite important, even from like now, starting now in 10 years time. You don't want a picture on there or a tweet of something that, you know, it is not going to stand you in good stead in 5-10 years time. But I think social media is really important, sort of, to get you noticed as well. A lot of teams do look at social media. They do sort of like advertise you through social media. They use that to gain themselves sponsors. So if you've got a big social media following, and if there's two people going for the same spot on a team, and you've got one person who's got a really big social media following, or like a really good social media platform, and someone that doesn't have it, as a team manager, you're always going to pick the person that has it, because there's a you know, there's sort of that connection there for sponsors for you to put sponsors out there on social media. So I think if you haven't got a social media platform, it's a good chance to start. It's a good time to start now and sort of build that up. But like Rich said, if you're getting the results, you're going to be picked for teams anyway. But it is very good to have. I think everyone should have social media as sort of a way to advertise themselves, and teams would look at that definitely.
That sounds like it could be a good subject for a session one evening, to actually deal specifically with how to and how not to build your social media presence.
I mean, I don't have that much of a social media following, so I'm probably not like the best qualified for that. But
not for you, but yeah, we'll I'm sure we can find somebody who can give some advice on that.
So we've got one question from Ben in the chat, which I will read through it. I'm not quite sure who to direct it to, but it's to do with what would you suggest for trying to get your second cat license early on in the season? It's a lot more difficult to get into big races a third cat, but I can agree with what you said about not racing too much, as it might be quite fatiguing. So just to start off with, I think one thing that I would say about that is it's about controlling the controllable. So if you can race as a third cat, and it's then about trying to quantify what you can do as a rider in them races as a third cat, not necessarily the results, and looking at to what you could do with the second cat. So it's just looking at what you do in those races as a third cat, and then hoping to progress when that might be. So I don't know if Rich or Emily has anything to say about that kind of that balance between getting points in the UK and racing and over training and stuff.
I think for me, I'd look at, because I don't know the numbers, but how many points do you need to get from your third cat to your second cat? And say it's 100 points in round figures, and if you win a race, you get 25 points or something like that as a third, fourth cat. I'd probably look at that and then target those races to get maximum points. So don't race every weekend and pick up 15th, 16th, 17th place. Race like every 3 weeks and pick up a couple of top fives, and you'd be much better focusing your energy on trying to do well in the races rather than just trying to do the maximum amount of races possible to pick up like the little points, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you there, especially like the alternative. You flip that on the head, like you're saying here, Ben, is you do almost like batch racing, try race as much as possible, get as many points as quickly as you can, but then you get to the end of it and you may need like a month and a half off the bike because you've raced every weekend, Tuesday and Wednesday. So yeah, going sort of with Alex and what Emily is saying is, you race to win. You don't want to force or rush the process of getting to Cat 2. You want to earn your way there. So Cat 3, you got to be able to win races to get up to Cat 2. And I think if you focus more on the process, pick and choose what you do, try deliver on the result, the Cat 2 will naturally happen. So I think it's more focused on the process as opposed to I want my Cat 2 license.
Okay, thanks, Rich. I'm just conscious of the time. From everybody else in the call, are there any other questions that people would like to ask? Open your mics and ask away, or type something up.
Yeah, I've got a question. How do you know you're burnt out, and what can you do to fix it? Question for anyone.
Really good question. I think I've been there myself, but if Rich or Emily, you have anything to contribute?
I think the only way to get over it is rest. That's it, is to put the bike away for a week, do something else, and then build back into it slowly. How do you identify if you're getting burnt out? My thoughts are is motivation. You just can't be asked to train. It's hard to get on the bike, and you're struggling to ride with purpose. Your VO2 work, you're struggling to sort of like dig deep. You can't like give everything, and then then your endurance work, you're just coasting too much. So but I think it's the mental side happens first when you start to get motivation dips. And it's just I don't know, can't really be bothered here. Well, normally you do it as a breeze, but yeah, rest is the only way out of it.
Yeah.
How about you, Emily?
I think if you're consistently not hitting your power numbers that you were seeing previously, your heart rate is, I can never remember which way around it is, but I think it's if your heart rate's really low and it won't go up, and that's a sign of like fatigue. But if that's sort of like a constant thing, like Rich said, if you're not motivated, if you don't want to be on the bike, like it's okay to have, say, 2 or 3 sessions in a row where you're struggling, you're not got motivation. Like you can't be motivated every single day, every single training session, but if consistently in a block you don't really want to do it, you can't hit any sort of numbers, like just little things like you get to like a little climb or something and you're terribly out of breath, that sort of thing, but your heart rate's not going up, and if this is like sort of consistent, then I'd probably say, like Rich said, you just need to have some time off. I'd have said more than a week, maybe like two weeks, like minimum. But yeah, I guess it depends. Is this sort of like something you're asking because you feel like you might be, or?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I am. I mean, it's been like 5 weeks and I was just kind of not doing anywhere near the same power I've been doing. My heart rate's actually been higher than it was at like the same power. And yeah, I've given it rest, but maybe I've given it rest and I've just lost my fitness. I need to build back up again. That what it could be, but I feel rubbish compared to what I was.
How long have you rested for?
Well, about 5 pretty easy weeks, and now I'm kind of lifting it up again.
Oh, so you've taken the 5 easy weeks. And what does an easy week look like? Just walk me through your week.
Well, after I got started noticing that I've burnt out, it's kind of just half an hour pretty easy rides, like zone 1, zone 2, maybe like 3 hours a week.
Okay.
Not much really, because I didn't feel like doing training, so yeah, because I wasn't really motivated, because I lost all my power, and then I was like, I can't be bothered.
How's the motivation now?
It's still, I can still go on my bike and train for a few hours, but it's not kind of as I'm not as willing to get.
He's frozen, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think he has.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered if it was me.
George. All right. Okay.
I think like really good point to add to that, George, maybe, and I think Rich's insights there as a coach is really helpful. Is in a situation like that, it is really good to try and get advice, if you don't already, from a full-time coach that can help you see you through that process. Because then when you start to rest, then like for a period of 5 weeks, it is getting that balance between whether you're feeling bad on the bike because you've detrained, or whether there's something more serious going on, which then you might need to, kind of do maybe even some kind of medical investigations. It might have been that you had COVID asymptomatically, and that's
I've done a blood test to make sure nothing's bad.
And then also just add to that burnout. I think the burnout kind of scenario is, I think, your body gets better from training when you're resting. Is what kind of the key thing is, just from what Rich said as well.
And I think it's natural to see. You mentioned, George, your heart rate's higher than normal.
Yeah, at the same power, it's far higher.
But that's a natural reaction. So my sort of 2 cents would be is that you want to build back into it slowly, and you don't want to be chasing the fatigue in the legs. So how many hours were you doing before you burnt out?
To be honest, it wasn't that much, like 8, but it was just hardcore Zwifting, really.
Yeah,
all the time.
That's what does it.
Yeah.
So what I'd suggest is, so you just say you're doing 3 hours now. Next week, next week do 4. Week after do 5. And a general rule of thumb, I think now, is like in that 4-hour week, only do 1 intense session. 1 tempo and then 2 endurance. Then your 5 hours, it'd be still 1 intense. You do 2 tempo, 2 endurance, and just slowly build your endurance work, and then start layering in the intensity.
All right, thanks.
Good tips there. Thanks, Rich. Any more questions from our? Anyone have coaches that they can recommend? That's. Can we hold on to that one, Jack? Because I think again that's a subject area which we can talk to and we can advise on that one. So
I'm sure if you message Rich then or Emily, they'd be willing to chat. But yeah, as Phil said.
Any questions from the floor? Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Emily and Rich, for your time this evening. I'm sure everyone's got a great deal of benefit from that and learned a huge amount. And we'd be very grateful to hear from you again at some point. I know that Emily had said that she might be willing to put a session on for females only, which I think would be a good discussion as well. So